Some time ago, I had a digital drawing class, and I used to teach people how to draw in perspective, just draw it in generally. One of the things that I used was Illustrator. Illustrator has perspective drawing grids involved in some of the tools. So these are the various tools used in Illustrator for drawing 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. You may find these useful, and because of that, I'm adding this here as some useful stuff.
Okay, I have my Illustrator file open to 8.5 by 11. I wanted it set to a landscape format because perspectives are often wider than they are tall. In order to establish a grid, and we're going to be doing the 1-point perspective grid first, what you need to do is you need to go up here to View and pull down till you get to Perspective Grid and go to 1-point perspective, Normal. Alright, so you're going to get something that looks like this on your screen. In order to adjust the perspective, you need to go to the Perspective Grid tool here. What you want to do is click on the top one, the Perspective Grid tool. If you grab this little gray dot here, you can move this wall of the 1-point perspective back and forth. If you grab this dot here, you can move the floor up and down relative to the horizon line, the vanishing point. And if you grab this line here, you can move the floor up and down or move the horizon line up and down relative to the entire perspective grid. So that is basically a 1-point perspective, the 1 point being right there. The other critical thing that you need to know about this is there's a locator icon up here. In 1 point there is the ability to select between either this wall or the floor. The wall being this, and if I click on this, this is the floor. There isn't a third wall because we're only dealing in 1-point perspective. Unfortunately, this view doesn't allow you to do the lock on position, which would change your drawing relative to the grid itself being changed. We'll see that in the 2-point perspective. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this wall here, and I'm going to draw in a rectangular shape. Now you'll notice I'm not holding down the Option key and or the Shift key. It's being constrained to the grid by virtue of the fact that I'm drawing it directly onto and using the grid format. I'm going to click on this here. I'm going to change my color to red so that we have a way of seeing our red wall. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my view. What I want to do is I want to draw an ellipse, and I want to draw it on the floor. I'm going to change my color here to blue, and I'm going to grab my ellipse tool from underneath the drawing tools, and I'm going to click here. Again, notice I am not holding the Shift key or anything. I'm just moving the cursor across the screen, and it's constraining the circle or ellipse to the perspective grid. And there is our blue circle or ellipse on the floor. Now what I want to do is I want to draw a star shape over on this side. In order to do that, I'm going to need to go back to my perspective grid tool, grab this, and move this wall over here like so. And what I'm going to do now is I want to make sure that I change back to the orientation to be able to use this part of the grid. I'm going to change my shape to a star tool. I'm going to click on this and change my color to like some garish green color. And now I'm going to draw a star over here. Now if you'll notice, it's drawing the star in perspective. The top two edges of the star up here are in line and going off to this vanishing point, even though that's not a perfect star. Okay, so I've got all my shapes drawn now, and I don't want the grid showing any longer, so in order to get rid of it, I go back up to View, go back to Perspective Grid, and Hide Grid. And then all I have left here are the shapes themselves on the screen, drawn into perspective, with a 1-point perspective being located somewhere right here. Okay, next we're going to take a look at the 2-point perspective that will be coming up here in just a few moments. Okay, here we are. We're going to be doing 2-point perspective this time. Again, I've got my artboard set to 8.5 by 11, and I've got it set to a landscape format because perspectives are wider than they are tall normally. And at this particular point, I'm going to bring in the 2-point grid. So I'm going to go up to View and go down to Perspective Grid and go 2-point perspective, normal. And here is our grid. You can adjust things exactly the same way that you did before. Going into the Perspective Grid tool, you can adjust the horizon line up and down. You can grab these points here and move them in and out to adjust your walls differently. And you can make the building either low and squat, it's a building, or a cube, or you can bring the horizon up from the bottom. That's actually moving the entire thing. What I want to do is actually bring the building down. This is the grid. So I want to bring the building up and or down relative to the thing to make it smaller. Anyway, so what I'm going to do here real quickly is I'm going to draw a big blue building. I'll show you how to do that. Go up here and click on this icon because we're going to be drawing on this wall first. And I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to change my color because I'm going to make my building like a big light, or a big blue box, if you will. And say OK. And again, I'm not constraining this using any of the key commands. This is being constrained to the grid because I'm using the perspective grid to draw from. There's the front face, left face of the building or box. Now I'm going to go over here. I'm going to draw on this side. Now what I want to do though is I want to make this box look like the light source is on this side of the building, or this is the lighter side of the box or the building. This side's going to be in shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this side so that I can draw over here. I'm going to change my color to a darker blue. You can see the difference here and say OK. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and draw in on this side. Now you can see that we have a box or a building, if you will, that appears to have a light side and a dark side. What I want to do now is I want to set the whole thing onto a black plane, if you will, like it's sitting on a black asphalt parking lot. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to click on the bottom icon so that I'd be drawing on the floor of the cube. Double click the color, change it to black, grab my rectangle tool, and start over here and draw out and underneath like this. Now the problem being is that the last object drawn is the one that's on top. In order to send this back, I've got to go up to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. And now we have the building appearing to be on a black. Now the nice thing about this, and you can do this in the 1-point perspective, but you can in the 2-point perspective, is that you can change the angle of the building once it's drawn. You can move it around. In order to do that, what you have to do is you have to go back to View and go to the Perspective Grid, and you have to go to Lock Station Point. What that's going to allow you to do is once you go up and grab your Perspective Grid tools, if you begin to move the perspective grid around, the drawing changes with it because the drawing is locked to the size or the dimensions of the perspective grid. So I can continue to move this around so I see less of this side of the box or building and more of the other. That's really nice. Okay, now I'm going to go up here because I don't want to see the grid any longer. I want to see what it's going to look like when it's all done. So I'm just going to go up here and go to View and go to Perspective Grid and hide the grid. So this is what it's going to look like. Okay, now we're going to try this in 3-point perspective. To do that, you're going to go up here to View, and we're going to come down here to the Perspective Grid. We're going to go to 3-point perspective and 3P normal view. This will open up the perspective grid. I'm going to back up on this a little bit so that we can see the entire thing. As you'll notice, 3-point perspective is, as I said, a point, 2 points on the horizon line and a third point either down or above the horizon line. In this particular case, it opened up with it below. I'm just going to go ahead and move the perspective grid. You have to go over here to your perspective grid tool in order to move this thing. What I want to try to do is I want to try to move in the perspective points just a little bit and snug up the bottom some, and we'll move the whole thing up onto the picture plane a little bit more. So now what we have here is it's like looking down on top of a building from what would commonly be called a bird's eye perspective. You could take this whole thing and flip it upside down, and it would be what's commonly referred to as a worm's eye. Alright, just as we did before, what I'm going to do is create a large blue box, if you will. So I'm going to start over here. We're going to click on the left hand side of our panel. We're going to change the color again to blue. I'm going to use a light blue because we're going to make it as though there's a light source coming in from this side of the building or the box. And grab my rectangle tool. And again, it's not being constrained when I start drawing with this by anything other than the perspective grid itself. So here's a blue side, a light blue side. Now I'm going to come over here and click on this side, which will be this side of the box or the building. I'm going to change my color to a darker blue. You can see the transition here. And what we're going to do here in this particular case is we're going to grab our rectangle tool and draw a rectangle that corresponds to that side of the size of the box, so you can see what that looks like. Now we're going to draw a roof or the top of the box. In this particular case, with the light coming in from this side, the roof itself is going to be lighter than either of these two sides. So in order to do that, I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to change to a very, very light gray, making it look like some kind of a roof on this building. Oh, sorry. Let's delete that. I forgot. I need to be on this view. So you can make mistakes every once in a while. Okay. And we're going to delete that too because I didn't go all the way to the edge. Start at this corner and draw out like so. There we are. So now we have a gray roof on a box with two blue sides. Now what I want to do is I want to set this whole thing again on like a black asphalt parking lot. So I'm going to double click my color here, change to black, and I'm going to come up here, and this time I'm going to grab over here and drag down and back this way. There we go. Now remember, since it was the last thing drawn, it's on the top. So in order to change that, I have to go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. And now I've got the blue box with the gray top on top of a black panel or a black base. Now if I want to see what that looks like without the perspective grid on, you go to Perspective Grid and go to Hide Grid. There we are. And there's our blue box on a black plane or building. So go ahead and try this with some of yours. Change the orientation of your grid so that you're looking at it from a worm's eye as well. It may take a little bit of getting used to, but again, it's using your perspective tools and messing with the vanishing points, reorienting them. Okay, so try that.
I will continue to add things from my old drawing class so that you guys can get an idea of actually how to draw by hand and also by using Photoshop and other tools. And we'll take a look at that in subsequent weeks. But anyway, I'm including this in the useful information stuff. Okay? All for now. I'll see you guys in the next video.